everyone introducing themselves, and I'm sure that will get some juices flowing for people's questions. So then down the line, I guess.
Funeral home, we're on family-owned funeral home in Chelsea, Michigan. Burial from an environmental field. I'll just go back quickly. I was a naturalist assistant at Yellowstone National Park for 2 years in '94, and then in '95, I actually worked at Old Faithful Station with the National Park Service when they reintroduced the wolves. From there, I was a deputy water resources commissioner from Ingham County, and then after a few years there, I worked for an environmental company called Smith Group JJR. And in the early 2000s, when the economy went south, I was one of several hundred laid off. And my father decided to retire, and my brother needed to trust. And I said no 3 times. And on the 4th time, I said, okay, let's try it for a year and see how it goes. And here I am. I was on the board of the Green Burial Council for several years. And now I'm on the advisory committee of the Global Green Burial Alliance. This is my passion, combining the environment and end-of-life services. I never dreamed that could happen, but again, here we are. So thank you for being here. Thank you.
And thanks for being such a flexible funeral director in our community. Mike and I worked together many, many times. My name is Merilynne Rush, and when I first started learning about green burial in about 2008, Mike was one of the first people that I got in touch with because I was talking to Joe Seehey, who started the Green Burial Council, and he's like, you know, you got somebody right. Right? And so families, I have not least helped anymore, who had home funeral, green burial, and or they're 2 separate decisions. If you care for your loved one at home after they die, before burial or cremation, that's called a home funeral, for lack of a better term. It's not always a funeral per se, but we do most of the care at home. The family does it themselves. There's a display about that downstairs. And then if you want to have natural burial, you can do one or the other without the other. So I started learning about that after retiring from being a midwife, a home birth midwife. It was kind of a natural fit to help families embrace the natural process of caring for their own dead. I'm also an end-of-life doula trainer. And I have been running a death cafe in Ann Arbor that meets monthly since 2012. And I do advanced care planning with folks, the healthcare kind, helping people talk about with their loved ones what kind of healthcare they want at the end of their life if they can no longer make their own decisions. It's an honor to be here with you all. Hats off to the organizers. Thank you so much, and great job, Tony.
Absolutely.
Thank you. For talking first. I'm one of the co-founders of the Evergreen End-of-Life Care Foundation of Michigan. For a big name, for a big purpose. I'm also an end-of-life doula. I have a bachelor's degree in business administration, and before starting all this, I was a bookkeeper for several years. Realized that I was tired of working for corporate, and I wanted to help people. I've always wanted to help people in this kind of environment, and now I get to use my skills of accounting to have those frank and honest conversations, and then combine it with my people skill and my end-of-life doula skills, and I feel like that's a really good fit. So I am super excited to be here.
And you can learn more about Evergreen downstairs at the
Yes.
home funeral display as well.
Exactly. We have a website, and if you haven't heard of us, that's okay, because we're brand new and we're here to stay.
Well,
I really won't say much more other than the other thing I forgot to mention is I'm currently in law school, and part of that is because you're starting a nonprofit and there's so many legal questions around this kind of burgeoning field. And I was saying that to kind of explain that to a friend. He's like, you know, I have to go to law school to start a nonprofit, right? But at times it's there's so many live legal questions, and I'm sure you guys can speak to that, and you probably know a lot more too. But on the Joe Seehey piece, he was from Detroit, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of wild that this has just kind of been, and it's been around for a while, but it's just really exciting to see this happen in this panel here. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody feel like kicking us off with a burning question that they might have? Or I can also start from our list of questions too.
Come on, you know you got it.
Yeah, I know. Do you have any advice or help for people that want to be buried on their own property? Is that easy, hard?
Well, I will tell you that I have helped 2 families, and our success rate is 50%. So what I tell people that are really interested in this, first and foremost, before you spend any money whatsoever, go to your township and your county health department, and if they say yes, that's 90% of the battle. The second thing you should do is look at the USDA NRCS soil survey, the digital one, and you can pull that up. You can Google it, and you look at the soil type of the property you're thinking of doing this, or where you own the property. Currently in Michigan, you can have, here's the quirky law part. As a licensed funeral director and an owner of a funeral home, I can't own or operate a cemetery, but everyone comes to us and asks this question all the time. So you can own a family cemetery up to 1 acre in size. And after the township kind of does this magic dust approval, you're good to go. Then every cemetery in the state of Michigan creates its own set of rules and regulations. That's why the existing cemeteries or the hybrids have been the easier ones to do. The conservation or the natural burials, I mean, we're going through a crazy lawsuit up in Whitehall right now because the township is just stubborn and uneducated. This family did everything right and even had early approval, and then all of a sudden the township said no. So my advice to everyone that wants to do this is get your township approval in writing and get it approved from the health department, and then you should be good to go. It's a great question.
And the bank shouldn't own your land.
What's that?
And the bank shouldn't still own part of your land.
I don't think that matters.
Really?
Yeah, I think as long as it runs with the title of the property in perpetuity, I think you're good to go.
Our parish purchased property and we're turning into a cemetery. And one of the requirements was we needed to own it 100% outright before we could intern any residents.
Interesting.
And that's different than a family cemetery.
That's different from a family
Yeah, that's
cemetery.
it. Since those are standing in the door, there's plenty of seats up here.
We don't fight.
A couple of things about that, just so you know, you can only bury people who are related to you by blood, marriage, or adoption on a family cemetery. The deed will remain in your name in perpetuity. It has to be accessible by road. Can't be too close to a water source, or a building. Yeah, it can be as small as 1 plot or up to 1 acre. Those are the
Great
major.
question.
I thank you.
So is it like an easement?
The access is usually in the easement. The one that I did in
Manchester.
Clinton County. Literally, the woman died before it was done. It was on a holiday weekend, and I had the health department's number, and he said, well, the easement's done, it's recorded, and it was literally this person waved a wand, and it's done, and so we can bury it. The other one was actually in Livingston County. It was on a beautiful sandy soil hill, very well drained, perked and everything, and the township and health department said no. It was surveyed, platted, I mean, it was done, and they just said no. So that's my advice. Do a little homework, don't spend a lot of money, and get those yeses first.
And negotiate well with your neighbors.
Right. Okay.
I have a question actually then. If, let's say we were to start advocating more for more education for townships and counties, like what might that look like in the future then? Or how would we even go about that to educate them?
Oh, it's easy. You go to your elected officials, you go to the health department, and you say, my family is interested, we have, purchased this property, we want to remain here in perpetuity.
How do we get more yeses though?
I think we have to do a lot of legwork,
That's-
we have educating and requesting and, you know, like I've talked to cemetery owners who said, well, nobody's asking for green burials. That's because they go on your website.
And it
It
says
doesn't
no.
say- it says you don't do it, or it
Right.
doesn't say that you can do it. So go ask,
I think
your
that
cem- like Julie said, ask your funeral directors, ask your cemetery, say you're interested in it.
If people know that you're interested in it, probably one of the largest questions I get from cemeterians is, well, we can't do shallow burial because we're in a rural community and we'll have all the scavengers, excavate the bodies. And my response to that is, if that's true, we would know where every indigenous burial is in the state and country. It just doesn't happen. And that's one of the myths that sort of my industry and the cemetery industry kind of falls on that sword. Well, we just can't do that. This is why. It's totally false. And change in the funeral industry, the cemetery industry in general, comes at slower than a snail pace. So the more it's requested, the more people know about it, the more it's going to be accepted. And that's really up to all of us to educate our township officials, our cemeterians, and say, we want this, we need this.
The Green Burial Council has a lot of educational materials. And actually, I have a book downstairs at the home funeral display. You can take pictures of those pages from the council website that, like, how to talk to your local cemetery, how to get started, things.
And really coming to things like this and talking with an end-of-life doula or a funeral director or a cemeterian, there's no such thing as a silly question, just the one that's not asked. So if we don't know, we'll find out for you and get back to you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience?
A question for Tony, if I understood you right. You make a distinction between, I think, a natural burial cemetery and a conservation one. I couldn't read your slide because of the lighting. Could you spell that distinction out more for the season court?
Yeah, so it's the Green Burial Council certifies 3 different types of green burial cemeteries. And so the difference between a natural burial is, really you could have them be very similar. I think the main difference is that a conservation cemetery partners with the land trust to preserve the land in perpetuity through a conservation easement. And typically you have at least 20 acres. You can have less if that cemetery butts up to more preserved land. But a natural cemetery, you could have a 30-acre natural burial cemetery, but it just doesn't have the same kind of conservation partnership as you would with a land trust. Does that make sense?
So conservation easement means you deed the land to a land trust in perpetuity, right?
Essentially, you're limiting the development value of the land, so that whoever, whether it's the land trust or it's bought and sold down the line, it will always ever have that conservation value baked into the deed, for those limitations.
It is a physical. I have an impression that the green burial cemetery would sort of look like a regular cemetery.
It can.
Mowed lawn and all that stuff, and the conservation one would sort of have natural forest or wilding or whatever. Is that part of the idea too?
That's part of the idea, and that's a great point you raise, is that a natural burial or green burial cemetery could still have the typical layout of a traditional cemetery with your larger headstones. And so that's more of a push towards the conservation is some of the rewilding, restoration of land, clearing the invasives. And I only mentioned that could still happen on a natural burial cemetery. It just might not be at the same level as the conservation cemetery if that partnership's not there with the land trust. And so you can have kind of a large range of activities on a natural burial cemetery. It's still no embalming or all biodegradable material, but you can have larger headstones, mowed lawns, and those kinds of things.
I think a good real world example for you, it's a hybrid cemetery, but it's totally separate from the conventional cemetery at the preserves, where it is totally separate on the same piece of property, but it's a natural burial cemetery or green cemetery. It's not a conservation area, and it has mowed paths and real out headstones. Most of the conservation burial cemeteries that I've seen either allow some very natural flat markers, or you get a GPS reading. A GPS reading where your loved one's grave is, and that way the land is allowed to return back to its native state.
Blue Stem also does metal plate, so even if, 100 years from now, it's growing up, everything, and people somehow we have an apocalypse and no one has smartphones, you can still.
And most of it, and you can help on this, still the native burials have to be pinned and surveyed, right?
Yeah, so they have
That's
a
the
grid.
middle.
Yeah, you can have different ways to plot out how you want to have, depending on your land, because 100 years from now, there may be a tree that,
And that one's the preserves at All Saints in Waterford Township.
Yeah, yours.
On a 20-acre plot, how many bodies can be buried in a year?
Yeah, so
Great question.
it depends on what kind of cemetery you are. For a conservation cemetery, they're really trying to limit, so about 300 to 400 per acre. A traditional cemetery is about 1,000 to 1,500 per acre.
300 to 400 per acre per year in a green burial site, or?
Per cohort.
Okay.
And so, that's another great question you're kind of raising, is if you would ever bury once the body is totally decomposed. And cemeteries have approached that different ways. It kind of depends on, I don't know if it's a rite of sepulcher or sepulture, it's kind of pronounced differently or spelled differently in the literature, but that's the deceased right to the kind of that land where it's buried. So there's some legal questions there.
When you buy the plot, you could almost sign over that right to say, hey, I'm okay with this, in 3 years from now when my body is, or however many years from now, is that something that it falls on the person who's buying it?
Practically, that's not happening.
I don't
it's not
think Michigan allows that.
Okay.
You can have double depth if it's the same family.
Okay.
But I don't believe once a burial takes place in a plot that you can resell that plot to a non-family.
And
Okay.
I should add,
Because Williamston Township was trying to write into their deed regulations at Summit Cemetery on Beaman Road. They were trying to sell their deeds and say after 30 years, they have the right to resell the plot.
Okay.
And I don't think that will ever go well.
Yeah, that's just interesting. It feels like, that would be,
and great question.
I would
That's,
be okay with that.
that's great. And
Yeah, I wouldn't care at that point.
part of the right. Part of the shift with conservation cemeteries have moved more towards you're buying the right of interment, and so you're not buying a specific plot. You're saying, and often you have the right to say, I want to go in this area, but if in 30 years from now that area is inaccessible, you still have the right to be buried somewhere in that burial space. And so you don't actually have the property right, and so it's a different kind of. There's 4 different kinds of competing property rights here, and it's tricky.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
And let's talk for a sec about some of the other trends that are out there, like the bury me and plant a tree trend. I always wonder how that works because when you grow a tree, you can't have other burials close to it eventually, right? Because there's root systems and.
Most of the cemeteries right now, at least conventional, will not allow you to plant trees or shrubs. So most of the green areas already have a landscape set and plan, and you may be able to plant a shrub, but typically, I think maybe the preserves you can plant a tree, but not many of them.
More so the prairie setup than prairie meadows.
And I think there's a lot of misconception too that the body is going to nourish the tree, and sometimes that doesn't work out well either.
Any other questions either aligning with this topic or diverging somewhere else?
I'm just wondering if I'm understanding correctly. So like a small local cemetery, like in, your local township, if they've been doing, vault burials and all that, they don't have to do anything special through the state to then change their rules to say you can have a green burial. without a vault
All
and.
they have to do is say yes.
But one of the biggest challenges is
Yeah.
that they feel like they have a responsibility for the cemetery to continue looking a certain way
Right.
to the other people who are, families, members, and people who are buried there. So often they'll choose a spot that's, back along the tree line or next to the hayfield or,
Which is kind of nice.
But if you
too.
still
which
want
is nice,
Yeah.
Yeah, so
But if you want to go in and be buried next to somebody who was buried 20 years ago and it's in the
Yeah.
conventional section, that could be, there's some
But if
cemeteries
you
that
were still
allow
willing
it.
to like have a headstone or whatever, that looks similar, the vault part doesn't, like visually looks different right at the surface.
It's
So-
actually less maintenance and upkeep
And less-
with a vaultless burial and a
Yeah.
green burial than it is with a vaulted burial.
Okay.
Because you don't have the jagged 90-degree edges and the soil compacts itself much easier with the green burial, native burial, shroud, or even, a softwood casket.
And you don't have to dig as deep.
You don't, but that's another thing that we're going through. And Marble Park in Milan does a really nice job because they understand the 40 inches in that first horizon of the soil profile is where the decomposers are.
Right.
And that's what we need. So you have to, I always say baby steps, because you have to start slowly, because most of these sextons have done this for generations and they took over from their father, grandfather, mother, aunt and uncle. And so they don't really know. All they know is, quote unquote, 6 feet under and we're good. But it takes time, and I think in our area, this is the part that kills me, and I talk to Merilynne about this all the time. The city of Ann Arbor won't touch it. They won't do it, they refuse to do it. They own multiple cemeteries, historical properties, they're not interested.
I heard there was a push for it.
Oh, there's a huge push for it, but they won't,
There's always various people pushing
Yeah.
different
there's
times.
lots of push.
Dipsy too, I've
Yeah.
talked to like the one by the river.
Is it for the reasons that you said, Merilynne? Like,
Yeah,
you
it's
just
really
don't
hard
want
to change. I mean,
Yeah.
It's
This is-
fear and lack of
It's
education.
fear,
To
yeah,
be
and
nice.
change, fear
Yeah,
of change.
change.
I mean, people don't want to change how it's done.
This is just a point you mentioned, the one by the river. A lot of fear around this is my water going to be contaminated?
Right.
I think this is the Quakenbush. This just had a really interesting
Oh.
anecdote, and then I'll share a stat.
This is great.
It's the salmon run every year and die along the shores and then rot. And
Hundreds of thousands.
yeah, hundreds of thousands of these salmon bodies are decomposing, and no one raises a stink about that. Even though you still,
Great quote by
there's,
him.
there's still, you still have to have a buffer between
Right.
the water and where you're going to bury. This is another crazy stat I heard. A family of 4. So the big concern is a nitrate, overwhelming the soil with nitrates. You have a family of 4 that produces the same amount of nitrates in 2 days of septic use than one body decomposing in a year. And so these concerns around water, in some communicable diseases, would need to be treated differently. But a lot of this is, the soil is one of the best filters we have.
So how many and where are green burials in Michigan?
There's a list downstairs on the funeral display table.
Yeah, and I
There's
think,
pictures and there's a list, and the list is always changing because, new ones.
General rough estimation.
There's like 12 to 15.
Okay.
so there's 12 or 15 that are green burial certified.
No, that offer green burial, whether or not they have anything to do with the green burial.
We have 7 or 8 within the west side of Washtenaw County. And most of them are hybrid
Jesse,
cemeteries,
Dexter,
yes.
Milan,
Yes.
Jackson.
Yeah, so we're getting there, and I think, again, if people go to their local cemeteries and say, this is what I want, talk to these people, i.e. us, and just say, look, this is what we used to do.
If you want to take up the cause of educating, please let us know. We're like working on this all the time, and I have to say, since I became involved in like 2009, 2010 with Mike's help, there have been 5 cemeteries where I talked to people and they started doing green burial. I mean, it wasn't just me doing that, but I happened to be like involved in that process. So that's what it takes. It's like,
That was our biggest hurdle.
You have to be annoying and say, this is what I
In a nice
want.
way, yeah.
And in the next way, that you have to say, this is what I want, and this is what I'm gonna do to Either find a solution or find a way around it, because frankly, it's your body, and if you really want this, go get it. It's your corpse.
Right.
You should be buried in the way you want to be buried, in the manner that you want to be buried.
What she said.
What question?
Yes, so I'm a little late. I was curious about cremation and burial also, like, are there environmental factors for cremation as far as being ecological, and then, if people wanted to bury their ashes, how does that fit?
I think the biggest concern with cremation from an environmental standpoint, in my mind, is you have thermal pollution, you have accumulated drift, you have the bigger issue, which is environmental justice, and the siting of retorts usually take place in an urban area, in an economically depressed area. And then you have the whole fossil fuel thing. I know that the crematories are very ineffective or inefficient in the morning, and then in the afternoon, they're extremely efficient because that residual heat is there, so it takes less energy to cremate the last body than it does the first body. But then burial of cremated remains, the state considers cremation the final disposition. So they don't regulate the scattering or the burial. Only the cemetery will want the burial transit permit or the cremation certificate. And as of a few years ago, it is now legal and free to spread your cremated remains in national parks. You just need a very small permit, and you call the office and you tell them where and when you're going to do it, and it has to be off a designated trail or sidewalk.
What people do all the time with us.
So is there any?
Yes, but
Yeah, people don't know, their options, they really don't.
I agree 100%.
And they don't know that that's,
So that gets me to a really, I see you still have your hand up, but I just want to interject, that's a really important point, is it the time to start doing research after someone dies, or when someone's in, a few days from death? I mean, you really have a lot more options, and we'll just be able to get more of what you want, and you have a lot more family involvement, and this is something that doulas do, is help people talk about what they want so they can put as much effort into it as you would buying a car.
No,
Instead of just doing what your family's always done because it's a pinch, you don't know what to do.
And there's more options out there for funerals, like aqua cremation and stuff like that, which is or aqua or water cremation, where they cremate the body using basically like a pressure cooker and water, and that's supposed to be more environmentally friendly, but it's not really well known or available in Michigan.
Yeah.
So if you want these options, work with organizations and stuff like that to kind of make your voice heard.
So just a follow-up, so whether it's the aqua cremation or the traditional cremation, are there any benefits to the body in that state that, is there a better place to put those remains that would have any kind of positive effect, or is there, a place that's worse to put those remains?
I think so. I think I interviewed with a funeral home in Colorado, and a lot of the research I've done on the aquamation, most of them are out west in really water poor areas, for lack of a better term. And I asked them, I said, hey, how many gallons of water does this take? And they said 400. So then I was talking with my colleagues in Colorado, and they have teamed up with a company in California. It uses 12 gallons of water, and it rocks the solution over the body instead of, and it may involve pressure as well. But the cool thing is 12 gallons of water, and then they neutralize the caustic solution with good old apple cider vinegar. And then that essence, if the family doesn't care for it or want it all, they take it and they irrigate an organic flower nursery with it. Colorado has a rule that you cannot use the water or the soil from an OR to grow food. But I don't think cremation is terrible. I don't think it's great either. I think there's a place and a very, very personal choice for whatever you want to do with your end-of-life wishes. And I think one of the great conduits is to the people that we have here, because my industry, there's a lot of distrust, and you really never hear anything good about my industry. So having a doula is like a conduit for goodness. Sorry, I just saw it too many
Oh,
times. But really, they are the teachers of Deathcare, and they are fabulous people and special, and we need them.
I'm gonna time check it real fast. We're about halfway through this. So like I said, in the beginning, feel free to stand up, shake your legs as much as you need to. There are still chairs up here, if you like one. Bathrooms are 2 up here, 1 downstairs, and this is being recorded downstairs and projected downstairs if you want to just listen in with the change of scenery. So given that there's about half an hour left, what burning questions have come up so far, before I turn to my list? Does anybody need water from there?
I would take one if that's.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe a refill.
What is a Death Cafe?
Death Cafe. And raise your hand if you operate a Death Cafe in Michigan. 1, 2, 3. So 4. So in the late aughts, there was a cafe movement that was quite active in Europe, and people just, the pop-up events, they got together to talk about a particular topic, and a particular sociologist started talking death, called it Cafe Mort. Then it was kind of solidified and made into a social franchise by an Englishman to create a space, a safe space for people to talk about death over tea and cake, so that it would normalize the conversation. It's always free, accessible, there's no agenda, there's no presentation. People just come together to talk about whatever they want to talk about. The way I run mine in Ann Arbor is we meet in small groups first, and people just talk about whatever's on their mind, whether it's a planning a head issue or a recent funeral they went to or a loss they experienced or they themselves are contemplating their own death or whatever. And then we come together in a large group and we all just share out. And it's just a really real conversation with good talking, no electronics allowed. People make, and then you do, it's with strangers, so you can just like get up and leave and then you don't have to see those people again. It works. You can go to deathcafe.com to learn more about it, read the history and everything, and then there's also a pretty comprehensive list of death cafes all over the world. They've been held in dozens and dozens and dozens of countries. There's been over 10,000, and they always follow. If they call themselves a death cafe, they agree to follow these guidelines.
And we have 2 happening here. Wednesday night, the 15th, Ray will be hosting the Queer Death Cafe here, and then the 25th, Ray will be hosting the Death Doula, and I will host the Death Cafe here. So those are here, there's calendar outside too. So.
And where is that online, that schedule?
It's with this all the soil stuff on our website.
Okay.
And then there's a thing right out here with QR code.
And that website is?
Michigan, mideathcare.com.
mideathcare.com.
And then under events, you'll find all that there. The whole agenda for this, and then things that goes out in the hallway too. What other questions are coming up?
It occurs to me that another appealing way to make some use of his body when I'm done with it is to donate it to medical research or something like that. I looked into that a little bit, and at least at the University of Michigan, if you go to the medical school, they say, well, okay, fine, but it's going to be cremated after that. No choice.
And it costs you money.
And it costs you money.
To donate your body. At Michigan, only in Michigan, not at Wayne or at MSU.
Oh, okay. Anyway, that's the only example I know of, but is it possible to give your body to medical research and then have a natural burial?
I think that is a fabulous idea, because we just, again, with Michael's help, with Merilynne's help, we did a green burial on a full organ procurement individual. And I see absolutely no reason why we couldn't go to these medical schools and say, look, that's great that you're going to cremate. However, there may be some individuals that want to bury whatever may be left after your term of duty, so to speak. I don't see why that can't happen. And I think that would take, kind of gets back to Merilynne, talk about this and make your wishes known. And there should be no reason why you, your funeral director, and the gift of life or anatomy, the anatomical gift department can't make that work.
So there's no law, there's no law requiring you.
Well, the only goofy part, and again, I shouldn't say goofy, but the state of Michigan considers anatomical gift a final disposition, even though right now cremation is the standard form. And then those remains can be returned to the family, or there can be a communal memorial service at Washington Memorial Park for you of that. I think you raised a very good question, and I'm gonna call them tomorrow and say, is this possible?
So, but let me just be clear, so the decision about whether to allow that is up to the, whatever.
I would say that's typically gonna be up to the legal next of kin, because there's no law that says the body has to be cremated. Now, the body may not be viewable in a conventional standpoint because of the practices and what happened for anatomical gift. That doesn't mean it can't be buried as opposed to cremated. That's a great question.
But I think what he's asking is if he was to walk into call up the medical school
Yeah.
next week and say, I wanna donate my body to science, but then I wanna give it back, I think that would take a lot of work.
Not necessarily, because at least with U of M, you dictate how long, you don't dictate where your body goes. It may go to another medical school, but there's no reason why working in concert with the school and the funeral home and the legal next of kin, we couldn't make that work.
Give him
That's-
the time.
That is
But isn't it-
huge.
I have heard lots of other not so encouraging stories.
But isn't it the case that those bodies, in the case of medical schools, have generally been treated quite,
They have been dissected, they have
Sure.
gone through the roles of,
haven't they been embalmed?
yes.
And so a body that's been embalmed can still be,
So you can
can still have a
have,
green
It's up to
burial.
it's up to the cemetery. So that's the distinction between that hybrid, the natural and the conservation. Those former two typically will not allow a body that's embalmed. The hybrid cemetery, we can make that happen.
That's a cemetery decision, not a state decision.
Correct. There is no law regarding the cemeteries. The cemeteries make their own rules and regulations.
It would take a lot of planning to do it, but if you really want to, and again, having those conversations early and working with a whole bunch of people and
Yes.
getting your team together and saying, this is what I want to do, and let's see what can happen.
Yeah.
So if you really want us to do it, it could probably happen, but like I said, it's gonna take a lot of work and effort.
Because, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think so much depends on that and advocacy, that is partnerships between the university and these cemeteries or other disposition options. But that panel I was mentioning during my talk, it was Blue STEM, Duke Medical School, the person who deals with the silent teachers, and then an aquamation facility. And the aquamation facility and the med school knew each other really well because they sent bodies back and forth. And so you can do, it just so much depends on the partnership existing.
And I think open dialogue goes a long way.
And time, and not doing it, when you're breathing.
One of the great things that Michigan now has, and I can't remember, maybe somebody here in the audience can tell us, Northern Michigan now has an anthropology lab. And before that, kind of the University of Tennessee Forensic Anthropology Department was the first one, but now we have one in Marquette. And so I don't know if after your term of duty, they keep your skeletal remains like the University of Tennessee does for a skeletal library. But that would be another very plausible way.
We are having a talk with Northern Michigan too. January 19th, the sign-up sheet is at the front door, and Northern Michigan is going to talk about their forensic research on bodies and stuff. So that's really that answer.
She's an awesome person.
And I wonder, like, with Northern Michigan, 'cause I knew about that. I knew about Northern Michigan, my son went there. I also wonder too, if you do work with them, if you can tell them that you want
your remains back.
Absolutely.
You know, just say, you know, use it for what you need, and then when you're done with me, I want it back. And that's just part of the deal.
I think that's part of the communication,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
as far as I know, no one's ever requested it, because it's kind of in their signature and their paperwork that after your term of stay or tour of duty is done, cremation takes place. But there's no reason why your family can't dictate something else.
I think one of the hardest things is when you're told what you have
What
to
you have
do,
to do.
which is not what you want to have.
Yeah.
And so anything you can do to start talking about this with your families
Well,
ahead
my
of
guess
time.
is that places like northern Michigan, I mean, that's probably, they probably just think that people are done with the body once they get it, and that people don't wanna think about it anymore.
Right.
And that might not be the case,
That
so
might not
that
be
they
the
just
case.
say, well, we'll just take care of it when we're done with it, and
That's a
not
phone call I'm
realizing
gonna
that
make
people,
tomorrow.
yeah,
That's
might want
awesome.
that, yeah.
Robin, I'd love for you to talk more about Evergreen and exactly how the nonprofit fits into the space as well.
My favorite topic. So Evergreen is a foundation that provides funds for end-of-life doulas, massage therapy, music therapy, and other items typically not covered by insurance. So end-of-life doulas provide holistic, non-medical care and support to families and loved ones, and they can do a wide range of things. They can do companion care, respite care, all sorts of things, and they're kind of your person in your corner at the end of your life. So the hospice and the doctors, they all kind of work for their own organization. The end-of-life doula kind of works for the family and works for you. Our organization provides funds for those people because end-of-life doulas, they're not covered by insurance. So if you can't afford the end-of-life doula's fee, then unfortunately you either have to work with a sliding scale or you kind of have to work to make it happen, and that's not fair. So our organization is here to provide those funds, as well as education and resources on a wide range of end-of-life options, and it could be advanced care directive, and it could just be, you know, helping you alleviate a little bit of anxiety about your own end and your own mortality. So Evergreen is kind of here to kind of help provide funds so you can kind of get the help that you need. And a lot of end-of-life doulas know about alternative burials. So they're going to be like, oh, I want a green burial, but I don't even know where to start. Well, they're going to have all these resources and have all this knowledge and also have the connections of the local area and be like, this is who you should talk to, and let me come with you and let me kind of help do that kind of legwork and kind of come together.
We have about 10 minutes, more or less, of our time together. Can I see a question?
It's a question for the whole panel. You guys have talked a lot about the resistance to green burial. Is there a core where that resistance comes from? Is it the state, county level, funeral directors? Is it just wanting to keep the tradition up of a traditional burial? I'm just curious where that resistance lies in general.
I can start and I'll paint it with a broad brush and I'll say yes. So when Merilynne and I started trying to do this, our biggest hurdle was finding a cemetery that would do it. And Marble Park was kind of the first one, and then there it just kind of expanded. The state really doesn't do a whole lot with it because it's still burial. So what the state is kind of putting their claws into right now, and we spoke earlier about this natural organic reduction and the aquamation. Many states have just said, okay, it's legal. And then my favorite saying, sprinkle it with dust and call it good. It's off and running. So Michigan is extremely conservative for some reason when it comes to mortuary law. And they want to regulate not only whether it's legal, but they also want to regulate the process to do it. And that's our biggest hurdle to natural organic reduction right now, and personally, I think with aquamation as well. The local side is more of, they're just unaware. It's sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's a lack of education. But when they realize that, hey, this is something that can help our small cemeteries, because a lot of small cemeteries, again, they've been handed down, they may not even have a board, and they're struggling to stay open or even to mow the grass or maintain it. When they realize that this is a viable solution that's going to help their cemeteries stay open, they get it. But that barrier is really hard to break through. It's a great question.
I see my time
So I think I think people just think, well, it's always been done this way, and I think a lot of people don't want to have those conversations with people until it's too late. And I always say, like Staffan-Mitchell always says, the difference between science and screwing around is writing it down. So I always say the difference between planning and talking to people about what you want is actually writing it down. So I think if we actually have those conversations and actually work with people and say, I want a green burial, and actually really talk with it, and that way we can actually start those conversations, then people are going to be aware of it and actually be able to grow, and then they can take those conversations to the funeral directors and the cemeteries, and you can kind of say, well, there's a demand, so where's the supply? And kind of work it together. And I think there is going to be some change about it.
I'd like to mention that part of what our effort has been is to locate funeral homes and funeral directors that will support green burial. So, once again, if you contact us, we can send you that information. We've also been working really hard on putting together a list of cemeteries and differentiating which ones are hybrid, because that was my own experience. As I was going to cemeteries thinking, oh, green burial, it's not all the same. And while Marble Park is a nice place, they mow.
Right.
And that didn't appeal to me.
Right.
And so we talked about all saints, they don't mow. And the only place that you can have a marker is along the mowed path. The rest of it is just a big field that's planted bee balm and all kinds of things to encourage bees and birds and, so you have to really know the difference too. So part of what we've been trying to do is put all that information out. We also, I'll just mention again, have been working really hard on getting a list of services that are available to help you. And, Merilynne's on that list, Mike's on that list, Tony's on that list, we want to become a collective together, right? Like we're meeting tonight to talk about it.
Right.
And so we want to become a resource for you as well. So just so you know.
And I think we really need to talk to the local people about what Tony is doing, because we need a conservation burial ground, and with that, Tony.
Thanks. Well, that's a great question, and it's so interesting because when I'm sharing with the general public or my grandparents, the largest reactions I get are, I'm gonna need to chew on that for a second, or oh, like the tree pod thing, like that kind of has kind of blown up. And so I've also heard a lot of interesting ways that folks, just the other day I was talking to someone who wants to be eaten by sharks. I think there's kind of a myriad of ways that folks, they kind of have an orientation towards this conversation, understandably that they want to keep it at arm's length, and maybe just talking about it is the best place to start, I guess. And I would just say, let folks chew on it. When people are resistant, I try not to be combative, because I think I understand, there is kind of we have an interesting culture that is both afraid of death and obsessed with death, in the sense that we watch things all the time where people are hurt, they die. And anyways, but just kind of, I've been giving folks space, but I'm just kind of keep having relationships with them. So.
Any other final questions in our last moments together?
From what I understand, you have to have a funeral director see the body put into the ground. Is that true? Because we hired one and he's like.
That's a great question. There's really only 4 things in the state of Michigan that we need a funeral director for. And one is not required, which is the embalming. The second is to sign a death certificate or a cremation permit. The third, and again, this isn't necessary either, is to lead a funeral procession, as strange as that might sound. Mm-hmm. And then the fourth is to supervise or witness final disposition. So yes, that's true.
Because we had, I think my priest said we would get $900 for the guy to be like he's standing off to the side, and it's like, good job, yeah. And my priest was like, is there anything we can do to get this part figured out? Because this is silly.
There's only 10 states where it requires the involvement of a funeral director, and Michigan is one.
So to clarify that too, even if you're trying to plan your end of life and you're, getting those plans written down, you do still need the funeral director to sign off, which is why we want the green burial. If you do want a green burial, you have to get the funeral director and the proper site.
To do those 4 things.
Exactly. Any other final questions? We could have one more. Quick one.
I just wondered, is the Jeremiah Collective like looking at a certain area for land, or do you have a plot that you're after? Or?
That's a great question. I think geographically, we like south central Michigan area. I mean, kind of between, I would think Jackson, Ingham, Washtenaw County, somewhere in that corridor. It's fascinating. I mean, within 30 miles, a little east of here, there's about 1 million people. And, so between all of these kind of hubs and kind of reaching out to Battle Creek, there's a property out kind of in Michigan Center that I've spoken with, there's land currently in the trust. But, a lot of hoops need to, be done through. And funds is another large question. And this is part of the commons aspect of this and the huge communal orientation impetus. We've been partnering with a number of other nonprofits that would like land access is a huge issue in this country. And so when we're talking about that alone and kind of building this, how do we preserve land for the community? I think that we can kind of meet a lot of goals together. And so we're hoping to partner with a number of nonprofits, about 3 or 4, and those that kind of geographically move this a little closer to Washtenaw County. But no, I'd love to chat with you a bit more in depth about land. Yeah. So we're always open to conversations with people and are continuing to look. Sure.
I've been in and out, so this question's been asked. But for a home funeral, if you wanted to have a home funeral, how many days between death and burial do you have to be with your loved one?
Again, so there's no actual law. I mean, the law is kind of tricky. There's this thing called the 48-hour rule, which is often cited by funeral directors, but it's not enforced by many of them, or nobody's going to come in and say it's been 48 hours unless the funeral director chooses to call that into play. So, I mean, bodies are cool. The 48-hour rule says the body has to be buried, embalmed, or cremated within 48 hours. Yet bodies all the time aren't. They're cooled and kept and preserved that way. So it can be something that's used against people who want to have a little extra time. But I have never found it to be an issue. When I've talked with the family and encouraged them and given them the accurate information, or they have it themselves, they can get this information themselves. They don't have to hire me to learn how to do this. But I will hold their hand through it if they want. The funeral director wants to know that you're proceeding in a stepwise fashion to a conclusion that's going to be reasonable, right? So if you go into a funeral director and say, we're going to do this and we demand this and it's going to be like this and it's going to be 7 days and we're going to do these rituals and blah, 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 you're not going to find a funeral director that's going to say, oh, sure, whenever the person dies, just call me, we're fine. I'm promising you I'll be there for you. But in the moment, I've never had a funeral director say no. And the typical length of time that a family wants to be with their loved one is 3 days. It usually happens, the people that I've worked with that have died at home on hospice or died in a facility on hospice and then been brought home, that it kind of comes to a natural resolution within 3.5, maybe at the outset 4 days. That's when the body apparently, in a lot of cultures too, also, it's like the soul's going over the body, and 3 days is very common. And the body teaches you, it's like, it's time. We can tell it's time, and we're ready to release the body. So, and it takes that long to do all the stuff you have to do to get ready for the burial or cremation anyway. So, like I said, no, there have been families that have gone for 6 hours, 12 hours, a day, 2, 3, 4. Okay. That's good.
And I'll just add that it's
easier
this time of year than it is in August.
But with dry ice works very well.
Dry ice works great.
And Washtenaw Dairy opens at 5 a.m.
We have Washington, Ontario on speed dial. And what's great is the doulas can help you with this, the doulas can educate hospice. It's just more communication, more planning, and the more you communicate and the more you plan, the better the results can be. Great question.
Happier your outcomes will be for everybody.
And the better your grief journey.
Yeah.
You can make these choices.
It's never too early to start making these choices.
So if that's the ending note, don't just take this information and sit on it.
Yeah.
Talk to people. If you don't have people to talk to, get people to talk to.
And write it down so everybody knows exactly what you want and it's in paper so nobody can argue with you about it.
And then sign it and say, these are my wishes, and make a smiley face.
Exactly.
And listen to me one last time.
Speaking of that, would it be useful and probably important to get it notarized, written down and notarized? Because like, is it really fully respected if it's just scribbled on a paper and just?
So it needs to be,
Does the law
I would say, like, make it accessible, make it so easy to find that in an emergency. Like, you got hit by a bus tomorrow, hopefully you don't, but you could go, oh, she wants to be cremated and it's signed. If you feel like somebody's gonna fight you, like if you have relatives, maybe get it notarized, might make it a little beneficial, but I mean, if you feel like you need to go to the extra step to like, feel comfortable with it, get it notarized, but if not, then.
Michigan has a great new law, and it's probably 2 or 3 years old now. It's called the funeral representative, and that can supersede the legal next of kin, chain of custody. So if you're getting pushback from someone or you're fearful of someone who will be in the legal next of chain of custody, you can appoint someone you trust. And that form can either be witnessed by 2 people or notarized. You appoint the person, the secondary, and they supersede even the spouse.
What was it called?
It's
Funeral
called,
representative.
It has been almost 10 years.
all right.
Cool.
So just a bit too is that a lot of this information does feel maybe all over the place, right? So we now have the website mi-deathcare.com to get everybody kind of on the same page with this kind of similar values or similar mindsets, or just where do I go? What do I do? I don't know how to start this, and I don't feel comfortable just writing it down. So visit that website. We're trying to get everybody kind of all that information in one place and easily digestible, which was just started by Hannah and Michael. So thank you so much for doing that. Thank you so much to the panelists. And then I'm going to give a quick rundown of what's happening within the next, what is this, a month or so. So again, Wednesday the 15th, we're going to have the Queer Death Cafe hosted by Gray from 5 to 7 p.m. I think you're in this room.
Yeah, this room or the other room.
Here or there. Saturday the 18th, here says tentative movie screening of Last Ecstatic Days.
Merilynne's gonna be doing a home funeral.
Great. Maybe just scan this QR code on your way out. Saturday the 25th, what is a death doula from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. And then right after that is the Death Cafe from 12 to 1 p.m. And then Wednesday the 29th is body donation for forensic research, which is virtual. You can sign up for that downstairs next to the other sign-up sheet.
John brought them up here.
Oh, great, John brought them up here, so helpful. February, Saturday the 1st is a climate cafe, which is 4:30 to 6 p.m. And then 5:30 to 7 p.m. is a little overlapping, celebrating the seasonal shift. And then Saturday the 8th is the closing reception, which is going to fly by from now, the opening reception.
There's sign-up sheets out here if you want to put your email down or anything like that as well, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
everybody.
Yeah.